This is what hockey looked like over 100 years ago, and here's what it looks like now. So how do we get here? It all started when a bunch of kids in Canada needed something fun to do during the freezing winters. They didn't have phones, video games, or warm gyms, just a frozen pond, a few sticks, and way too much energy. So they did what Canadians do. They made a game out of it. They grabbed whatever they could find, started chasing a block of wood or frozen manure, and boom, hockey was born. But let's be honest, early hockey, it was a total mess. No helmets, no pads, no real rules. Goalies weren't even allowed to drop to the ice to stop the puck. That's like telling a fish it can't swim. The puck? Sometimes it was a lump of rubber, sometimes frozen cow dung, and yet somehow they still played like it was the greatest thing in the world. Every bump, bruise, and lost tooth was just part of the fun. Games could break out anywhere. A lake, a river, even a snowy street with boots for goalposts. Sticks were carved by hand, skates were strapped to regular boots, and the locker room was usually a snowbank where kids left their mittens. It didn't matter. The second that puck dropped, whatever shape it was, everything else disappeared. It was just the game. Over time, things started to shape up. They swapped out the cow dung for actual pucks. They made better sticks, ones that didn't snap in half every period. They figured out rules that made the game flow instead of just turning into a giant snowball fight. Positions became a thing. Goalies got better gear, eventually. And by the early 1900s, the first proper hockey leagues were starting to form across Canada. From Ottawa to Montreal to Winnipeg, teams were popping up like snowbanks in January, and cold, noisy arenas packed with people, yelling, stomping, cheering, freezing, all just to watch this wild new sport. The smell of sweat and sawdust filled the air. Fans banged on the boards and shouted out names of local legends. It was rough, it was loud, and it was magic. But the players? They weren't superstars, not even close. Most of them had full-time jobs just to survive. One guy would work 10 hours at a factory, then lace up his skates and play a full game that night. Another would milk cows in the morning and take slap shots at night. They weren't playing for fame or money. They were playing because they loved it, because it made them feel alive. And honestly, so did everyone else. Fans braved blizzards to watch their hometown heroes. Kids copied their moves on backyard rinks. Hockey wasn't just catching on. It was sinking deep into the bones of the country. It was becoming part of Canada's heartbeat, part of its soul. By the time the 1990s rolled around, things were getting bad, real bad. Hockey in Canada wasn't dead, but it was bleeding. Slowly, quietly. And the scariest part, almost no one saw it coming. It started with money. The Canadian dollar was weak, and running a team up north was getting way too expensive. Meanwhile, player salaries were going through the roof, especially in the US, where teams had bigger markets, newer buildings, and deeper pockets. Canadian franchises just couldn't keep up. Some arenas were crumbling, ticket sales were dipping, owners were losing money. And when that happens, teams disappear. First, it was the Quebec Nordiques, a proud franchise with a loud fan base. Gone. Packed up and moved to Colorado in 1995. Then came the Winnipeg Jets, another beloved team with decades of history. Gone too. Off to the Arizona desert, 2 Canadian cities, 2 hockey hearts, ripped off the NHL map. People were furious. You could feel the heartbreak on every block. Fans held rallies in the snow. People wrote letters to city councils. Kids cried in their jerseys. Families who'd grown up cheering for these teams suddenly had nothing. It wasn't just about losing a franchise. It was about losing part of who they were. Hockey wasn't just a sport in those cities. It was part of the identity. And now it was gone. But that wasn't the only storm rolling in. The NHL itself was in trouble. Inside the league, things were falling apart. Labor disputes exploded. Lockouts hit in 1994, and then again, even worse, in 2004. That one was a disaster. They didn't just cancel a few games, they scrapped the entire season. Gone. Nothing. No playoffs. No cup. For the first time since it was created in 1893, the Stanley Cup just sat there, untouched. Not even 2 world wars had done that. It felt like the soul of the game was fading, like the thread that held everything together was slowly unraveling. But this is Canada. And in Canada, you don't just give up on hockey. People kept showing up. They filled barns and rinks from coast to coast. They watched junior games. They built backyard ice with garden hoses and snow shovels. Kids still played under streetlights and frozen stars. Neighbors still argued over which team was better, because hockey wasn't just entertainment, it was a lifeline, a rhythm, a part of life. And then, just when it felt like the country might lose its grip on the game, something incredible happened. In 2011, after years of waiting, the Winnipeg Jets came back. After 15 long years, the team returned, and the entire city lit up like it had just won the cup. Streets were packed, fans wore vintage jerseys. People cried. It wasn't just a return, it was a revival. A reminder that this game still mattered, deeply. and that no matter how far things fall, hockey might bend, but in Canada, it never breaks. Word started to spread. What began as a simple winter pastime was quickly catching fire. Soon, towns all across the country were forming their own teams. Ottawa had one. So did Montreal, Quebec City, and a bunch of tiny places tucked between snow-covered hills and icy rivers. Towns you've probably never even heard of. If there was a sheet of frozen water and a few willing players, a team would form. The games, they were chaos, and they were perfect. The ice was choppy. The lighting, if there was any, was dim and flickering. Referees were often just whoever wasn't playing that night. People slipped, sticks broke, fights broke out, but none of it mattered. The stands, wooden benches, or hay bales, were packed with people stomping their feet and shouting their lungs out. They weren't watching professionals. They were watching their neighbors, their kids, their heroes. It wasn't polished, but it was real. By the early 1900s, the momentum was impossible to ignore. Organized leagues began to pop up in cities and rural corners alike. Teams started to dress in matching uniforms instead of whatever shirts they had lying around at home. Rules were formalized. Scores were recorded. Rivalries were born. And then came something that changed everything. The Stanley Cup. Back then, it didn't sparkle like it does today. It looked more like a silver punch bowl from your grandma's attic. But to these players, it was the holy grail. Then came the early legends, the kind of names that kids whispered like folklore. Cyclone Taylor, who skated so fast, people said he could outrun a train. He'd zip from one end of the rink to the other like a flash of lightning. George Veza, the fearless goaltender who stood in the net with no mask, no padding, and barely a flinch. He stopped pucks with his chest, his arms, even his face, and never complained once. These guys weren't just athletes. They were mythic. And as more teams joined and rivalries intensified, hockey began to spread like wildfire. From dusty prairies to bustling city blocks, everyone wanted in. Churches and schools organized teams. Local shops sponsored jerseys. Entire communities shut down for game day. And by the time the 1920s and 30s rolled in, hockey wasn't just something you did in the winter. It was something you lived for. It wasn't just a game. It was the country's heartbeat, the frozen heartbeat of Canada. And this was only the beginning. The golden age of rivalries and icons was just around the corner. After hockey took off in the early 1900s, it didn't slow down. Not even for a second. The Stanley Cup quickly became the most sought-after prize in sports. Every team, every town, every rink dreamt of it. Winning it meant everything. It meant you were the best in Canada. And for Canadians, that was the only title that mattered. By the 1920s and 30s, professional leagues were running strong. Teams like the Montreal Canadiens and the Toronto Maple Leafs weren't just local clubs anymore. They were national symbols. Symbols of resilience, grit, and pride. People didn't just cheer for them. They lived and breathed with them. And the players, they were absolute warriors. This was before helmets, before mouthguards, before modern pads. They played with broken noses and black eyes. Teeth got knocked out. Bones were cracked. But they just kept going. No drama, no excuses. Guys like Howie Morenz, the lightning bolt from Stratford, lit up the ice with speed and skill. He was so electric fans called him the Babe Ruth of hockey. But then tragedy struck. Morenz broke his leg in a game and never recovered. He died not long after. And when he did, the whole country mourned. His funeral at the Montreal Forum drew thousands. It wasn't just the loss of a player. It was the loss of a hero. In the 1940s and 50s, the Canadiens weren't just good. They were terrifying. They built a dynasty. And at the center of it all was Maurice Rocket Richard. The Rocket didn't glide. He charged. He was the first player to score 50 goals in 50 games. But it wasn't just his numbers that made him a legend. It was his fire, his heart. He was fearless. He'd fight through checks, crash the net, and bury the puck, all in one brutal shift. To French-speaking Canadians, he was more than a superstar. He was their champion. So when he was suspended in 1955 for a fight, the outrage boiled over. Montreal erupted. Riots tore through the city. Stores were looted. Cars flipped. It was raw emotion, because it was about more than a penalty. It was about respect. Meanwhile, the Toronto Maple Leafs were building a legacy of their own. Players like Ted Kennedy and Syl Apps were leading the charge. The Leafs were tough, smart, calculated, and the rivalry between them and the Canadiens became the stuff of legend. When those two faced off, the country split down the middle. You were either blue or red. No middle ground. And when the puck dropped, it wasn't just a game. It was war. Families were divided. Friendships paused. And for 60 straight minutes, nothing else in Canada mattered. Then came the 1960s, and the game exploded again. The NHL doubled in size. New cities joined. Fresh fans poured into rinks. Hockey was no longer just an Eastern Canada obsession. It was going national, even creeping south into the US. It felt like the game was growing up. And right when everything was expanding, Bobby Orr showed up, a kid from Paris Sound who played defense like no one ever had. He wasn't just fast, he was fluid. He'd weave through traffic like he had a magnet on his stick. He'd block a shot on one end, then score on the other seconds later. In 1970, he scored the goal, diving through the air as the puck slid into the net. That frozen frame with Orr soaring like Superman became one of the most iconic images in hockey history. And just when Canada thought it had seen it all, 1972 changed everything. That year, hockey became something bigger than a game. It became a battlefield. The Summit Series, Team Canada versus the Soviet Union. It wasn't just East versus West. It was democracy versus communism. It was Canada defending its game. The Soviets were fast, disciplined, cold as steel, and Canadians were shaken. But game after game, the teams battled. Blood, sweat, controversy, and tension that could crack glass. Then came Game 8, tie series. Final moments, and out of nowhere, Paul Henderson, he jammed in the rebound, the red light flashed, and the whole country erupted. Schools stopped class. Offices halted meetings. Radios blasted the news. People danced in the streets. For one moment, Canada was one heartbeat, and it was beating for hockey. That goal didn't just win a series. It sealed hockey's place in the soul of Canada forever. But things weren't done yet. In the late 1970s, a skinny, quiet kid from Brantford, Ontario stepped onto the ice and rewrote the game. Wayne Gretzky, the great one. He didn't look like much. He wasn't big. He wasn't fast. But he saw the ice like no one else ever had. He passed the puck before you even knew where it was supposed to go. He didn't just play the game. He orchestrated it, like a conductor with a hockey stick. And with the Edmonton Oilers, he made magic. They tore through the league, lighting up scoreboards like Christmas trees. 4 Stanley Cups in 5 years. They made it look easy. Every night was a highlight reel. The Oilers weren't just winning. They were redefining what winning looked like. Gretzky's battles with the Calgary Flames and the New York Islanders were the stuff of legend. Canada versus Canada. Then Canada versus the world. The rinks were packed. The tension was thick. And right in the middle of all that chaos, Calgary had its own moment. And in 1989, the Flames did the impossible. They beat the mighty Canadians and hoisted their first and only Stanley Cup. It wasn't just a win for a team, it was a win for the West. For the underdogs. For every prairie kid with frozen toes and big dreams. But in 1988, everything changed. Gretzky got traded to the Los Angeles Kings. It felt unreal. The kid from Brantford, gone. Fans cried. Broadcasters choked up on air. Canada stood still. Because it wasn't just a trade, it was like losing a piece of the national soul. But in the pain came growth. That move changed hockey forever. Suddenly, kids in California were begging for skates. NHL jerseys were popping up in places that didn't even have snow. The game was spreading, and Gretzky was the reason. Canada had handed the world its greatest export, and it was just getting started. Even after Gretzky, the legends kept coming. Mario Lemieux, tall, smooth, unstoppable. Patrick Waugh, calm as ice, clutch as ever. Marc Messier, the warrior, the leader, the guy who made promises and actually kept them. And Steve Yzerman, silent, fierce, and pure class. These weren't just players, they were myth makers. Then came 1993. The Montreal Canadiens went on a playoff tear. Overtime after overtime, they just refused to lose. Waugh was a wall. The team had swagger, and when they finally lifted the cup, the whole country smiled. Even fans of rival teams. Because that wasn't just Montreal's win, it was Canada's. And as of now, it's still the last time a Canadian team won the Stanley Cup. But Canadian hockey didn't stop there. The late 90s and early 2000s brought a new wave of greatness. Jarome Iginla, tough, humble, and a trailblazer. One of the first black captains in NHL history, and one of the most respected men to ever wear the C. Joe Sakic, the quiet assassin, who led with actions, not noise. And Martin Brodeur, part goalie, part magician, always one step ahead. These guys didn't just fill stat sheets, they filled the hearts of fans. They were heroes for a new generation. They reminded us that hockey wasn't just surviving, it was evolving. Then in 2020, the unthinkable. A virus. COVID-19 shut everything down. Games canceled, seasons paused, the world fell silent. And so did the sound of skates, sticks, and sirens. But hockey didn't give up. The NHL created the bubble. 2 cities, no fans, no families, no distractions, just the game. You could hear every shot, every breath, every crunch against the boards. It was eerie, it was different, but it was still hockey. And Canada kept watching. From living rooms and laptops, the love never faded. Somehow, we made it here. Today, hockey in Canada still feels like everything, but the torch is being passed slowly, quietly. The stars we grew up watching, Sidney Crosby, Carey Price, Jonathan Toews, they're in their twilight. Crosby's in his mid-30s. Price may never play again. Toews has stepped away. It's not just retirements, it's the end of an era. An era that carried Canadian hockey through its toughest and brightest years. But a new dawn is breaking. Connor Bedard, still young enough to get ID'd at a movie, just finished his rookie season. And already, people are whispering, next Gretzky. His hands, silky. His shot, lethal. His focus, unshakable. And Cale Makar, he's like a cheat code on skates, gliding, dodging, striking. These aren't just prospects, they're the future. The game is evolving too. It's faster now, smarter, cleaner, less brute force, more ballet, smart gear, HD replays, stats that track every stride. Some miss the blood, others love the beauty, but no matter how it looks, the spirit hasn't changed. Canada is still in it, always has been. There's even talk of expansion. Maybe Quebec City finally gets its team back. Maybe a new city rises from the shadows. Who knows what the league will look like in 10 years? But one thing's for sure, Canadians will still be watching. Now in 2025, the spotlight is on the next generation. Bedard is electric. The Oilers are close, again. And for the first time in a long time, people are whispering that maybe, just maybe, the cup is coming home. Hope is back. Real, honest, goosebump level hope. And through it all, through heartbreak, lockouts, trades, and triumphs, Canada has never let go. Never stopped caring, never stopped believing. Every winter, backyard rinks light up like magic. Kids shovel snow, tape their sticks, and imagine themselves in Game 7 overtime. Parents stand on the porch, coffee in hand, watching future dreams unfold under frozen stars. And every Saturday night, the ritual continues, couches filled, TVs glowing, popcorn popping, and hearts pounding. Hockey night in Canada isn't just a show, it's a tradition. This game grew with the country. It shaped us, united us. It made us cheer, cry, hope, and heal. It's in the way we talk, the way we play, the way we dream. And even though the names on the jerseys will change, the love, that never will. Canada is hockey, and hockey is Canada.